So I recently made a video about the Unifi Dream Router, and in that video I talked about how it might just be the only Unifi device that most people need. But in this video I'm going to talk about why I'm getting rid of my UDR and switching to this thing, the UDM SE. Hi everyone, welcome to another Tech Talk with Samir, where I talk about anything and everything related to technology in my life. Although recently it feels like I'm only talking about my Unifi home network, but that's because I've been making a lot of changes to it and I want to bring you guys along with me as I make these changes. So recently I had switched from my old Unifi security gateway to the Unifi Dream Router. In my video about it, I talked about why I switched and how it became the brain of my entire home network. It's basically a network controller, a router, a switch, an access point, an NVR, all in one device. I also talked about how for most people the UDR just may be the only device they need to get into the Unifi ecosystem. So what's with this video? Why am I switching away from my UDR? Well, there's a few reasons and I'm gonna get to them in a bit, but here's what I'm replacing it with. It's the Unifi Dream Machine Special Edition, or UDM SE for short. This box is actually empty because I already have it up and running in my network closet, but let's just pretend it's in here. Similar to the UDR, this device also is a network controller, a switch, a router, and an NVR all in one device. But the similarities end right there, because one thing this thing is not is an access point. And that's because, as you'll see later in this video, the UDR and the UDM SE are intended for completely different crowds. If you watched one of my Unifi related videos from last year, you know that I've had my eyes on this particular device for a while. I always thought that this is the device that I would ultimately upgrade to from my USG back then. Inside the box, you get the UDM SE itself along with a small box that contains the power cable and some rack mounting gear. Taking a closer look at the device itself, you have a small LCD screen on the left side. This is something Ubiquiti has been adding to all their recent devices for displaying things like IP addresses, port information, and some other troubleshooting information. Just as I've said with the other devices, it's nice to have, but once I have everything up and running, I likely won't be looking at the screen too often. One thing to note is that the LCD is a touchscreen unlike the one on the UDR, so you can navigate around to see different information on the UDM SE screen. Also in the front is a hard drive slot. This is to add storage for keeping surveillance footage if you have Unifi Protect cameras. This does also have a built-in 128 gig SSD similar to the UDR, but like I've said before, 128 gigs is practically nothing when it comes to storing video footage. The difference here is that you can actually use a 3.5-inch hard drive to expand storage, whereas on the UDR, you were limited to only microSD cards. So you have much more options when it comes to the types of drives as well as the storage capacity. The 128 gigs of built-in storage is actually one of those features that distinguishes the UDM SE from its cousin, the UDM Pro. I know I'm switching from an UDR to this device, but most people that are looking at this device are likely contemplating between this and the UDM Pro. So I'll be pointing out certain things that distinguishes this one from the UDM Pro. So on that note, perhaps the biggest thing that distinguishes the UDM SE from the UDM Pro are the Ethernet ports. All 8 LAN ports now have power over Ethernet. 6 of them are regular PoE and 2 of them are PoE+. This is likely the biggest reason for the $130 price difference between the two devices. And honestly, if you don't need these ports to be PoE, just go with the UDM Pro and save yourself the $130. Unless if you specifically need a 2.5 gig RJ45 WAN port, because that's another difference between this device and the UDM Pro, which only has a gigabit RJ45 WAN port. As we get more ISPs offering multi-gig internet, 1 gig WAN ports may soon start to become limitations for some situations like small businesses. So having multi-gig compatibility will definitely future-proof your setup. That being said, even the UDM Pro has multi-gig WAN capability through the SFP Plus WAN port, which both the UDM SE and the UDM Pro has. The SFP Plus port can support up to 10 gig WAN speed. So when it comes to future-proofing for multi-gig internet, both the UDM SE and the UDM Pro are very capable. In addition to the SFP Plus WAN port, there's also an SFP Plus LAN port capable of 10 gig speeds. This can serve as an uplink connection to the rest of your network to minimize bottlenecks. But you can also change the SFP Plus WAN port to a LAN port through the network controller. So if you have two devices that you want talking to each other at 10 gig speeds, like maybe a workstation and a NAS, you can do that without getting a 10 gig switch. So to summarize, the only major differences between the UDM Pro and the UDM SE are the PoE Ethernet ports, the built-in 128 gigs of storage, and the 2.5 gig RJ45 WAN port. Once again, if none of these things are essential for you, just go with the UDM Pro and save the money. So why did I choose the UDM SE instead of the UDM Pro? And why am I switching from the UDR at all? For me personally, the PoE ports got me sold on this device. At this moment, I don't have a PoE switch. I had 2 PoE ports on the UDR and that's it. So to power my third access point, I was actually using a PoE injector, so it was a bit messy. So having 8 PoE ports will go a long way in allowing me to expand my network. Because not only will it power my access points, I can also add a couple of surveillance cameras and some small switches and get them powered directly from this device. So because of the lack of PoE ports on the UDM Pro, the UDM SE was the only logical choice for me between the two. Now, before I get into why I'm switching away from the UDR, take a moment to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. This is a very small channel and every one of your support goes a long way. And while you're at it, make sure to also hit the thumbs up button. So the UDR on paper sounds like it has all the bells and whistles that the UDM SE has. And if you just compare features, honestly the UDR is probably more feature packed from the outside. I mean, the UDM SE does not have a built-in access point. So unlike the UDM SE is not a complete solution to a home network. And that's precisely because of the difference in the target audience for these devices. The UDR is designed to be the one device you bring home to solve all your home networking needs. You hook it up to your ISP's modem and you're pretty much all set. You get very good Wi-Fi, some Ethernet ports for your wired devices, and has a built-in controller for you to make all the configuration changes. The addition of the access point is what ultimately makes it appeal to the average person looking to soup up their home network. Because let's face it, the average person is just looking to use their devices off of Wi-Fi. And that's the key here. With the UDR, they're trying to target the average person. The same person that's going to the big box stores to look for a Wi-Fi router because their ISP's one has terrible coverage. It's even priced that way. At $200, it's actually competitively priced compared to other high-end consumer Wi-Fi routers. The UDM SE, on the other hand, is designed more for people that want to be a little more involved with networking. I'm talking about small business network admins or enthusiasts like myself. The people buying the UDM SE and even the UDM Pro, they're likely gonna buy other networking devices to integrate with a router like this, like maybe some switches and some access points. Also, a rack mountable device like this is intended to be put in a network closet, whereas the UDR is designed to be put in an open area so that the Wi-Fi can reach the places where people actually hang out. Also, even though the UDR on paper has a lot of the same features that the UDM SE and the UDM Pro has, they're all a bit dumbed down. I mean, yes, you can technically run the network controller, Unifi Protect, Unifi Talk, and Unifi Access all on the UDR, but you can only run 2 of them at a time. And once you start looking at the internal specs, you can see why. The UDR only has 2 gigs of RAM and they don't really specify the type of RAM. The UDM SE, on the other hand, has 4 gigs of DDR4 RAM. Similarly, the UDR has a dual-core CPU, while the UDM SE has a quad-core CPU with higher clock speeds. And these lower specs on the UDR actually shows its limitations in several places. Even though you can technically run 2 applications, I'm only running 1 because I don't have any devices that go with the other applications. But even then, the RAM on the UDR was almost maxed out at all times. I can't imagine the experience being very good if you do run 2 apps. And even while running only 1 app, you can quickly see some of the limitations caused by the lower specs. Like in the network app, you can turn on threat management, which is their version of intrusion detection and prevention. But the threat categories that the UDR can protect against is significantly dumbed down compared to the UDM SE. Also, based on what I've read online, turning on threat management on the UDR can hamper your internet speeds if you have 1 gig internet. I personally never experienced this because my internet is only 300 megabit and is done just fine with those speeds. But the one thing I did notice is just how much slower the UDR's user interface is when I'm browsing around either on the web browser or on the Unifi mobile app. It takes significantly longer to refresh the dashboards on the UDR than it does on my UDM SE. Even going from page to page on the web interface is a lot more clunky on the UDR. Also, if you look at Unifi Protect, for example, yes, technically you can connect cameras to the UDR and have it record footage, but like I said before, you can only expand storage using a microSD card. And as we all know, microSD cards aren't exactly designed for continuous write operations. So the use cases for Unifi Protect on the UDR is very limited in comparison. With all that said, the UDR is still an amazing device and everything I praised about it in the past is still true. For most people, it really is the best Unifi device to get into the ecosystem. Most of the flaws that I pointed out will never affect majority of the people out there. The average person isn't going to go into the user interface looking at dashboards very often, so the sluggishness of the interface will not affect them. And the Wi-Fi you get from the built-in access point is excellent from my testing. That brings me to my specific scenario. There's basically 3 reasons why I'm switching. The first reason is actually something I just praised about the UDR. I have my networking gear in a closet, which is kind of in a hidden area within my home. It's not exactly the best place to keep a wireless access point because it's so isolated from where everyone uses their devices. So I'm not able to take advantage of the built-in wireless access point. But I also can't turn off the access point, resulting in some overlap of coverage area with my other access points. This sometimes confuses my devices and they don't always connect to the right access point as I'm roaming around the house. So yes, you can have too much Wi-Fi coverage. The second reason is actually rack mountability. So I'm in the process of planning out a revamp of my network closet. Currently I just have a small bookshelf where I keep all my networking gear. Not a pretty sight. But I'm hoping to organize it in a way where I incorporate a network rack to tidy things up. So the more devices I have that are rack mountable, the easier it will be to organize things. The third reason is the performance. Despite the specs, the UDR will perform just fine for most people, but my usage case is not exactly the same as the average person. I like to dig around the Unifi dashboard to play around with different features and settings all the time. The clunkier user interface on the UDR really gets frustrating at times for me. Also, I recently got a fiber internet at the house and our internet provider supports speeds up to 5 gigabits. Now, I don't ever see myself upgrading to speeds like that, but I am considering upgrading to 1 gig soon. So having a router that can do threat management at speeds like that will make a big difference when I do upgrade. With all that said, here's what my home network looks like right now. I have an Ethernet cable going from one of the LAN ports of my ISP's modem into the RJ45 WAN port of my UDM SE. I have my 3 access points connecting directly to the UDM SE thanks to the new PoE ports on this device. I then have a DAC cable connecting from the SFP Plus LAN port of the UDM SE going into my Unifi switch aggregation. This is my 10 gig switch. I have all my high bandwidth devices connected to this switch, like my network attached storage devices and my video editing rig. This way, not only does those devices talk to each other at multi-gig speeds, they also have a multi-gig connection back to the router. And then from my 10 gig switch, I have a DAC cable going into one of the SFP ports on my 24 port gigabit switch. Most of my wired devices are connected to this switch. I am, however, contemplating whether I even need this switch anymore, because the 8 ports on the UDM SE will go a long way for me. And I can always get a smaller switch to expand if needed. I just don't know if I need 24 extra ports, especially since it's not a PoE switch and I can't connect any cameras to it. But yeah, that's where my network stands at this point. In summary, the UDR is still a great device and I highly recommend it for most people, if you can find it in stock. But on the other hand, I'm super excited to have switched to the UDM SE, mainly because I like to switch things up and this thing opens up a whole bunch of new avenues for future expansion. Anyways, thanks for sticking with me till the end of this video. As always, stay safe and I'll see you again on the next one.